everyone. Welcome. It is Debbie De Grote, and we're having this today on Tuesday instead of Wednesday. So welcome to our webinar today. We're going to be talking about servicing the listing. And of course, the reason that it's so important to have great communication with your sellers is some of you may have noticed that when communication breaks down, they kind of lose their mind, right? Like they don't cooperate with price adjustments. They may be resistive to offer negotiations, even to spite their own self, right? To hurt their own self because they don't want to cooperate because they're upset with you. So we're going to talk about some ideas around servicing the listing. We've been spending a few weeks together on the topic of listings. We have a couple of more great topics coming up over the next couple of weeks, so watch for those. So if you do me a favor and just type a quick hello in the chat box where you're from, and maybe if you have something to share, like something awesome you do to provide 5-star service for your sellers during the process of getting their home sold, that'd be great. We always love to hear your great ideas. And then also, if there's something in particular that you're struggling with when it comes to working with these sellers, please type that in. So I see lots of names here that I am familiar with all across the country. Tracy, thanks for joining. Say hi to Kathy for me. Awesome. And as I look at all of these different parts of the country, I realize that each of you have different things going on in your market, right? So for some of you, homes may be selling very quickly. Others, we may be seeing as much as 60, 80, even 90 days on market. So the longer the days on market, the more service we have to give these sellers. So once that listing is signed, the pressure is on to keep these sellers happy and get the home sold, isn't it? And if you were with us on a previous session, we talked about the minute that that listing is signed, plan to stay another 20 minutes at the house, 15 to 20, talk to those sellers, set the expectation. Now, I say once the listing is signed because when they've chosen you, they listen to you better. And you know you've secured that listing. Now you can be a little bit more direct with them about the realities of things like they need to make that property accessible. They need to keep it sharp and in great condition. Let them know how many showings they're likely to have because in their mind, they think that house is going to sell tomorrow with 25 offers, right? That's their dream. So if you'll set the proper expectations, that will relieve just a little bit of the pressure. But then we've got to remember, even the nicest people can lose their minds when they deal with the stress of selling their home. I know you guys have noticed this. I always had to remind myself, though, that sometimes the people that were the most stressed, they were the most motivated also. And you guys, maybe you sold your own home, in the not too distant past, and you remember how it feels. You put that sign up in the yard, and every day you come home, you pull into your garage, you see that sign, and no one has bought your house. And it's very, very demoralizing. So we have to try to remind ourselves, be patient, walk a mile in their shoes, and understand that while we deal with this every day, they maybe sell a couple of homes in a lifetime. So I think it helps me to remind myself to be patient. Now, if they have to chase you for updates and information, they will quickly become aggressive. Plus, that puts you in a defensive position. So, as you're sitting at that table and you're talking about what's going to be done to sell their home, a couple of things I'd like you to make sure that you do. One of them is ask their permission to always be direct and honest about feedback, market conditions. You know, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I respect you enough to tell you the truth. And sometimes the truth might be a little bit painful to hear. So I need to ask you today, do I have your permission to be completely honest, very direct when it comes to sharing things that you need to know to make the decisions you may need to make? And see, that then allows me, when it's time to have that tough conversation, I can remind them, I made you a promise. You gave me permission. I'm going to be direct because that's what you asked me to do. Now, that's one thing. So get their permission that you can be direct and very transparent with what's happening. Second piece is set your communication plan. Right? So talk them through, what is the communication loop going to look like? So I might say, for an example, and this was always my plan with my sellers, I would say, hey, you know, Winston, what I'm going to do for you is every Monday between 1:30 and 3:30, I'm going to give you a call. I'm going to talk to you about what happened over the weekend, any activity, any interest. I'm going to talk to you about what are the proactive activities that I'm going to be doing in the next week to get the home sold. And I'm going to answer any questions that you have. So you can always expect to hear from me. In the week in between, please feel free to write down or even email me and say, hey, Debbie, when you call me on Monday, I'd like to discuss X. See, guys, what I want to avoid doing is leaving that loose where they don't know what I'm going to call, which means they're going to be calling me, which I prefer is not happening. I prefer that I have a scheduled time with them. Also, if I say, call me anytime, you know how we do that, right? We get the listing, we're so excited, we say, call me anytime. And then they do, right? So I don't really want to encourage that. Then I can also talk about any reports, anything that I'm going to be sending them electronically. Now, there's something I read once, and it's called an ideal service scenario. And it said that we should ask our clients to describe if they're going to end this transaction and they're going to feel that we delighted and surprised them with value, that it was a true 5-star experience. What does that need to look like? So I might say to Winston, I normally will contact you every Monday. So Winston, in terms of an ideal service scenario, is that going to be enough communication for you? Now you might say, but what if Winston says, no, I want you to call me every single day? Well, then we need to know what we're dealing with. Maybe we can negotiate with Winston that it's not every day, but it's twice a week, right? So we want to describe what they're going to see, what they're going to get, when we're going to talk to them, and always make sure that when you join that call with them, that you have a theme. You have chosen a point of focus for that conversation for that week, and that you're prepared to talk about the proactive efforts. Now, it doesn't always have to be new efforts, right? You can say things like, once again, this week, I'm going to be looking in the MLS and I'm going to find What agents have matches set for their buyers and they're not showing the house, and they should be? And I will be contacting them. Once again, this week at my office meeting, I'm going to be reminding them to bring us great buyers. So it doesn't always have to be new things. Sometimes I think you all struggle with that. It's just being very verbal about the things that you actually are doing. Now, when it comes to the themed calls, I sold a lot of houses in markets where it might be 180 days on the market, and you kind of run out of things to say, don't you? So I kept a little list on my wall. Now, I couldn't use the same theme for every seller in that week, because they were all different situations, or some listings were new and some were older. So I just had my menu of themes for the week, and I could pick one as was appropriate for that customer. So one of my themes could be, it's time to talk about a price adjustment. One of my themes might be sharing feedback about condition and then my recommendations of what we should do about it. A theme might be talking about accessibility. Maybe they haven't been letting people in. A theme might be giving them my proactive update of everything that's been done since we listed the property. And a theme might be looking together at any new competition that's on the market. So you get my point, right, guys? So just make a list of everything you could possibly talk to them about. So if you've had that listing for a while and you're getting stuck, you can go to that list and you can pick a theme. So they're going to be a lot more relaxed, a lot more reasonable to deal with when they feel you are supportive of them. Now, it's always good for you to have your baseline of activities, and I'm sure you do, that you guys do on every listing, and then how you're communicating that. And again, present that plan to the seller. Ask if it meets their expectation for a 5-star experience. Now, I think the advantage to knowing their priorities, their motivation, if you will, it does allow you to adjust the plan as needed. You guys might remember, might have even been on last week's webinar, I gave you a question to add as you're setting that listing appointment, and I would really encourage you, ask it every time. So if I'm on with Tori and I'm setting a listing appointment with Tori, I'm going to ask Tori, tell me, what are the expectations you have of the sales professional you will hire? Now, if you notice, I didn't say, Tori, what are you looking for in an agent? Because that sounds like, well, then I'll try to be that. It sounds very weak, right? But no, instead, Tori, what are the expectations you will have of the sales professional you will hire? See, this is where I want to discover what matters most to that seller. So Tori might say, well, I think it's really important that the agent I work with have a very strong marketing plan. See, guys, in this phone call right now, I'm not going to talk to Tori about this. I'm just going to acknowledge her. I agree. That's incredibly important. Let me make a note of that. Now, that note is for myself, because what that just told me is that's a hot button for Tori. So now when I go to that actual listing appointment, since I know marketing is a priority for her, that allows me to slightly customize my approach or conversation so that I can give her what she needs. I can meet that expectation, which gives me a strategic advantage. So I might go into the home and say, Tori, I'm so excited to be with you today and share all of the great things I'm going to do to get your home sold at the highest realistic price possible. And Tori, you probably agree with me that an important part of that strategy is marketing. Would you be okay if we jump right in and go directly to the things I'm going to do to market your home? So Tori's going to think, wow, she's speaking my language. Yes, this is important. She probably doesn't even remember that she told me marketing was important to her. But even if she did, doesn't matter, right? Because I acknowledged her that, yes, I agree. That's very important. I think it is too. But what if Tori said, well, I think what's important to me is I expect the agent I choose to have a great communication plan. And I want to feel that I have a good relationship with them. Well, when I go to that listing appointment, guess what? What do you think I'm going to emphasize? So back to, but what if they tell me they want me to call them every day? You know, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I totally appreciate why your anxiety level will be high. And I know that it's important for you to know that I am working hard. The challenge I have, though, with your expectation of lots and lots of communication every single day is that may not give me the time I need to do the work to get your home sold. And quite frankly, if I call you every day, I won't have much to report. So would it be okay with you if we set a different communication plan that's more than I would normally do and gives you what you need and still allows me to go get the home sold? So I can negotiate with them, right? So before I got on, I was just talking to an agent that I coach, and she said, I've never fired a seller before, but I'm going to get on the phone right now and I'm going to fire this seller. She said they don't do anything I ask them to do. The house shows terribly. The price is too high. I told them I was on a 1-week vacation, and they literally texted me 40 times in that week, angry and aggressive texts. And she said, I'm going to fire him. And I said, okay, well, you can do that. It's probably a smart idea. I said, but whenever you have a seller that's at your wit's end and you think, I need to fire him, why not go for it? Why not have that tough love conversation? Mrs. Seller, I was on vacation. You knew that. My team was here working hard, and yet you texted me 40 times. You've burned through 2 other agents. I'm the 3rd one, and I'm just about to let you go. Perhaps what we could do instead is create a new acceptable plan of communication that works for you and works for me. Are you open to that discussion? And if the seller says no, they want to text you 40 times, fire them, right? And I know it's a hard decision to make, to let a problem seller go. Though, in your heart when it's the right time, when they are consuming every waking moment of your day. My daughter had this listing and she told me, Mom, Rosa called me last night at 12:30. I said, oh, honey, did you answer? And she said, well, yes, because see, it was her first listing, at the time. And I said, oh boy, she's always going to call you now after midnight. And sure enough, she did. So that's why you need to know their expectations. You can counsel them on what would make sense. Let them know what your office hours is. Don't say, call me anytime. Okay. And then remember, the first few weeks are really your chance to wow them with your attention and service. I think of this especially when it comes to a for sale by owner or an expired. See, they may have had a bad experience. So what they're doing in those first really like 1 week to 2 weeks is they are watching you like a vigilante. Am I right? Like they are just waiting for you to drop the ball or screw up. So if you can take those people that might have had a bad experience, show a little more love the first week or two, then you often can kind of calm them down and get into a more normal groove. And Winston, you're right. It is the ones that bug you the most that either pay you the least or they are the most overpriced and the ugliest house. It just never fails, right? So if you drop the ball in that first 2 weeks, it's going to be really hard to rebuild that rapport and come back from that. Be careful. Once you win them and win their trust and rapport, you make a mistake, they're a little more forgiving, not in that first couple of weeks. Keep your promises, be prompt, do everything you told them in your plan you are going to do. And your goal is not just to meet their standards, but to exceed them. And I think it's important, we often talk together about people's personalities and adapting to those personalities so that we're speaking their language. When you're taking that listing, I do think it's important to make a note of their personality style. Then you can adapt your communication to what they need. So I'm going to give you guys an example. I'm a high D. So if Kelly had my home listed, I may like Kelly perfectly fine, but odds are I don't want to have a relationship. I don't want to know what Kelly did over the weekend. I don't want to have any chit chat. When Kelly calls me or communicates with me about the sale of my house, I want bottom line, cut to the chase, give me the facts. That's it. That's what I want. And I probably am going to tell Kelly, hey, you don't need to call me, email me. I only want to talk to you once a month. Like I'm going to lay down the law because I'm a high D and she needs to listen. Now, if I'm a high I, or you're a high I's love to talk. They're going to want to be more involved in that conversation. How are you feeling right now? What is your thoughts about what we should do next? Did you have anything you wanted to share with me today? Because they like to talk. High S, we're going to have to be very calm, very measured, right? And patient, because they often struggle making big decisions like a price adjustment. High C, very analytical. You're always going to need to present data to them. And if you're asking them to take an action like a price adjustment, well, then you're probably going to want to make sure that you're outlining the recommended steps, very clear, bullet pointed, maybe sending that to them a day or two in advance so they have time to absorb and process. And then you have that conversation with them. So give them what they need to make a decision. When you don't, it's pretty tough to persuade them. Also, let's make sure that if there's more than one party on title and involved in the decision, don't always just talk to one of those two owners. Because think about this. Jordan, if you did a great job having that conversation with owner number one, and then you don't speak ever to the partner, owner number two, and owner number one hangs up the phone with you and says to owner number two, Jordan said we should reduce the house. No, I don't want to. And they get all upset. Why? Because they didn't hear any of the data or your explanations or the feedback. right? So it's very important. Sometimes it's easy to go to the person that's easier to deal with or always volunteers to speak with you. But let's make sure frequently, not necessarily every time, but frequently we're communicating with all parties. So Jordan is asking for an example of baseline activities. Guys, please feel free, share ideas with Jordan, type in the chat box things you do. But I think number one, make sure you have a regular scheduled call. And number two, maybe Jordan, you set them up on listing alerts, notifications so they can see when other properties in their area are listed, pended, or closed, which gives you guys something to talk about. Many of our clients will send them the information on how many online viewers, I like to call it online previews, the property has had. Any feedback that other agents have given, whether you want to put that in writing or discuss it verbally. Many of you in the different CRMs that you use, you have listing management tools that you can actually drop that listing in and it will give you a menu of recommended activities. So I would check your CRM and see if there's some tools there. Now, what I also like to do as well is look for interesting articles that I might share. So I might Google, is it a seller's market? Or you go into Chat GPT and ask questions, and then you get these articles and these answers. And if I can share an article from Wall Street Journal that backs up the conversation I'm having with the seller, well, that's a nice little stamp of authority. So I might send articles or relevant big picture market information. So just remember, when you ask that question, what are your expectations of the sales professional you will hire? Make note of that hot button and work to deliver. And also, if you have staff that are interacting with your sellers, give them the heads up on this and give them the heads up on the personality style and some communication tips, because you might be making the seller very happy and then a staff member speaks with them, handles it wrong, and then the whole situation blows up. So obviously, here's just a summary of some of the things we've talked about so far. And remember, you're the doctor, they're the patient. So when you're having that conversation and it's time to recommend a price adjustment or other incentives you feel they need to do to get the home sold, you need to say it with confidence. Don't be weak. Don't apologize. You did not create this market. It is what it is. You did not tell them to buy a house facing the prison and backing to the junior high. They chose that location. So just like a doctor could tell someone, if you don't stop smoking, you're going to die in 6 months, the doctor can't make them take the action. So you give them all the data and information. You're attached to providing what they need. You're attached to keeping your word on the communication and being clear and doing your best. But then you've got to detach a little bit from that ultimate outcome, because if they choose not to listen, well, that's up to them. And then if you happen to have a strong staff member and you've got a lot of listings, maybe part of your communication plan can be, my admin will be contacting you, call it your office manager, listing manager, will be contacting you every other week to talk about feedback and any logistical things that you might need to know. I will be alternating with them, which will give us time to gather some data and measure response so we can make decisions on whether or not to adjust the price. So you could cycle in a staff member. And then again, back to what we said, big price adjustment conversations, negotiations of offers. Let's get all decision makers involved. Now, if they express frustration, and they might not be even nice about it, don't react defensively. Acknowledge their frustration and discuss proactive solutions. And by the way, Winston, thanks for that tip about Stephen Thomas putting out weekly reports. You could also purchase Area Pro, which is a fabulous tool that allows you to run lots of different data, cool reports for your sellers, and you can even put it through their Chat GPT, and it will write scripts for you on how to explain it to your seller. So let's say that I'm calling my seller and they get on the phone and they say, I am just so frustrated. I can't believe it. We thought we made the right choice in choosing you as our agent. It's been 3 weeks. We've only had 2 showings. This is a disaster. We are so upset. Mr. Seller, I completely understand. If I were you, I would feel exactly the way you do. I am beyond frustrated as well. And that's exactly why we need to have our conversation today. Because you see, I know when we sat down together initially, we talked about this market is different than 6 months or 12 months ago. It's just harder when you're actually living it. I get it. And I also understand that you guys don't have to sell quickly. But remember, when we sat down together, we talked about days on market are not our friend. They work against us. So now that we're 2 weeks in with nothing near the activity we need, it's time to discuss a price adjustment. Because if we could adjust it now, we might still have a window of opportunity to sell it inside of 30 days, which normally means you will get a better offer and a better price. Are you open to that discussion today? No, it's only been 2 weeks, not open to the discussion. Guys, don't force it. You won't win. Then you say, okay, let's set a time, this time next week. I'll bring all the new information, the activities I've completed, any additional feedback. At that 3-week marker, that really is a key time to make a decision. So I'm going to acknowledge their frustration. I'm not going to get upset about it. If they become abusive and out of control, you could always say, I can tell you're very upset. So let's do this. We're going to end our meeting now, and I'll give you a call tomorrow, right? Because remember, you got to be prepared to handle those emotions, take a punch, and come right back to the table. Well, you haven't even shown our home to one buyer. You're right. I know that I haven't, even though I've been prospecting aggressively for a buyer every day. So that's exactly why I'm here today, to talk about the adjustment we need to make on your home. And remember, we talked about that most sellers, and this was, I think, last week, they only have a couple of price adjustments that they might be willing to give you, and then they're going to fire you. So don't make small adjustments. Go for the gusto. I shared with some of you last week that there was a NAR report several years ago, and it said that if a property has some activity and no offers, statistically, it's at least 5% too high. If it has nothing, it is dead in the water. Statistically, it's at least 10% too high. So depending on the activity level, your goal would be ask for 5, don't take less than 3. Ask for 10, don't take less than 7. And if they say no, I have a saying when it comes to listings, if I'm going to keep it, I must keep asking. And every now and then you may ask for an extension on the listing in lieu of a price adjustment. But then you're going to come back a week or two later, if it's not sold, and ask again for that adjustment. And of course, we have to look at if it's not selling, what other factors? Now, we know if the price is cheap enough, it'll always solve the problem, right? If it's cheap enough. But we don't want to make it cheap. We want to get the highest realistic price possible. So do we need to remind them to make it accessible? Has it been a minute since you've been inside that home? Go take another look. And here's why I suggest that. You know, when I went to list it, they had it all perfect and spiffy and beautiful. But then real life sets in. It's now been on the market a month, 2 months. They've got kids. They're getting them out the door in the morning. And I go over in the middle of the week, let myself in and look around the home. Bed's not made, dishes in the sink, dog food spilt on the floor. And that's what buyers are seeing. So always be sure to tell them what other factors might be causing the problem. So remember, there's going to be problems with the property, problems with the market. When you present the problem, always have solutions and options for them. Return their calls and emails promptly within those business hours. Let them know your schedule and train them I say this with a smile, train them the best you can to contact you in those hours that are easy for them to reach you. And along the way, even if they told you what their ideal service plan, so let's say as a high D, I said, I don't ever want you to call me. I just want you to email me the report. Well, if I said that, what if I changed my mind later? So you probably should ask along the way, is there any additional communication that you need from me? Would you prefer a call versus an email? Because I want to make sure I'm adjusting if they change their mind. Right? Now, Pamela, in terms of marketing, we don't have time today to go deep into marketing the listing. What I will say to you, though, is if you think about it, when you put it into the internet, when you actually list that property, the whole world can find it. So exposure is not a problem. I would explain that to them. What I would explain, though, is the proactive things that you personally do each and every day. How you reach out to the community and invite them to an open house. How you go through your database and find appropriate prospects. How you do that reverse prospecting to other agents. How you share that with your office and the agents you work with. So lots of focus on proactive versus spending a bunch of money to run ads that often don't give a great result, right? Now, remind your staff, if they're talking to these people, whether it's an outbound call or they just took an inbound call and that seller expressed any level of frustration. Now, I don't mean they were yelling necessarily. It might be like, well, I haven't heard from Debbie, so I guess everything is fine. It's like, uh-oh, red flag, seller's not happy. They should immediately escalate that to you. And then you should promptly give that seller a call. Now, whenever I would take a listing, I always like to just automatically mark 30 days prior to its expiration, a little alarm going off in my calendar, because if it's coming up for an expiration, I want to get plenty of time or have plenty of time, put my report together. What is everything I've done to sell the house? What has been all the feedback? What are the recommendations? And what will I do proactively when they take my recommendations and extend the listing? So I always want to have that conversation 30 days before it expires. So I know we covered a lot really fast. We always do, which is why we do record this. So you will automatically get a copy of this recording tomorrow. I want you to take a minute, look at your tools in your CRM today, find out what you could use that you're not using. Should you be putting them on listing alerts or market reports, just so they're getting that constant feed of what's happening in the community? And do you need to go back to any current sellers and have that conversation about a better communication plan? Because I don't want you guys to lose these listings that you work so hard to win. So here we are, zooming into the second half of the year. Lots of time left to have an awesome rest of the year. If you need some help with that, scan that QR code. I will be happy to speak to you about what you need to make this the best second half possible. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks for the feedback in the chat box and saying hello to each other. And now make some money. And let's go make some money for our sellers. All right, guys, have a great day. Bye-bye.